When a royal headline begins to spread across social media, it usually takes only a few minutes before people start forming opinions. Sometimes those opinions are calm and thoughtful, but other times the reaction is immediate, emotional, and filled with speculation. And recently, one particular headline has been doing exactly that. A headline that instantly grabbed attention not just in the United Kingdom but across the United States and around the world. The headline sounds dramatic, almost cinematic. Prince William becomes the owner of the Queen's private estate. And almost immediately after that line appears another phrase that makes the story feel even more explosive. Camilla's family is reportedly not happy. Now, whenever royal property, inheritance, and family dynamics appear in the same story, things tend to get complicated very quickly. Because the royal family is not just a family, it's also an institution, a centuries-old structure built on tradition, hierarchy, symbolism, and very carefully managed public perception. So when something like a private estate suddenly becomes the center of conversation, people naturally begin asking questions. What estate are we talking about? How did Prince William become the owner? Was this always the plan? And perhaps the question that has triggered the most curiosity: why would Camilla's family be upset? To understand why this story is creating so much noise, you first have to understand how royal property actually works. Because many people assume that everything connected to the monarchy simply belongs to whoever is currently sitting on the throne. But the reality is far more layered than that. There are royal palaces that belong to the crown estate, which means they are essentially tied to the monarchy as an institution rather than any single individual. There are residences that belong to the government but are used by the royal family, and then there are private estates. Private estates are different. They belong personally to members of the royal family and can be passed down through inheritance just like property in any other wealthy family. That distinction matters a lot, because when we talk about the Queen's private estate, we are not talking about something that automatically transfers through official royal channels. We're talking about personal property that can be passed to whoever the owner chooses, and that's where things become interesting. For decades, Queen Elizabeth II maintained a few deeply personal residences that were separate from the public royal properties people usually think about. These estates were places where she could step away from the constant pressure of royal duties and live in a slightly more private world. Places filled with memories, family holidays, quiet moments away from cameras. One of those estates has now become the center of the latest royal conversation. Reports suggest that ownership has moved to Prince William. Now, on the surface, that might not sound particularly shocking. After all, William is the future king. He is the eldest son of King Charles. He has spent his entire life preparing for a role that carries enormous responsibility. But when property and inheritance enter the royal equation, the emotional dimension of family relationships often becomes impossible to ignore. Because inheritance decisions can sometimes send messages, intentional or not, and those messages can be interpreted in many different ways. Some observers believe that passing an estate to William simply reflects long-standing royal tradition. The monarchy has always been built around the idea of continuity, and William represents the next chapter of that continuity. From that perspective, the move looks straightforward, logical even, but others see a deeper layer beneath the surface. They wonder whether the decision subtly reinforces William's position as the central figure of the monarchy's future, not just symbolically but materially. Because property in the royal world isn't just about land or buildings. It's about legacy. It's about influence. It's about the quiet signals that shape how power and status are perceived inside the royal circle. And when those signals appear to shift, even slightly, people notice. That brings us to the second part of the headline. The suggestion that Camilla's family is unhappy. Now, it's important to be careful here because royal reporting often mixes confirmed facts with speculation and interpretation. Stories can grow quickly, especially when they involve private family dynamics that outsiders can't fully see. But the idea being discussed in royal circles is that some members of Camilla's extended family may feel that the balance of royal inheritance is leaning heavily toward William's side of the family. Again, Perception plays a huge role here. Camilla herself became queen consort when King Charles ascended the throne, and her position within the royal structure has evolved significantly over the years. What was once a highly controversial relationship slowly transformed into something that the palace worked very hard to normalize. Public appearances, charity work, gradual integration into royal life. All of it helped reshape the public image of Camilla over time. But even as her role became more accepted, the internal dynamics of royal inheritance never fully disappeared from the conversation, because Camilla has children from her previous marriage. Children who are not part of the royal bloodline, and that distinction matters deeply within the traditions of the monarchy. Royal history is filled with moments where inheritance decisions quietly reinforced the line between those inside the royal succession and those outside of it. So when a valuable or historically meaningful estate ends up in the hands of Prince William, some observers interpret it as another example of that long-standing pattern. The royal bloodline remains the central axis around which assets, titles, and symbolic power continue to revolve. From an institutional perspective, that makes perfect sense. The monarchy survives by maintaining a clear structure of succession and authority. But from a personal perspective, these decisions can still carry emotional weight. Families are complicated, even royal ones. Especially royal ones. Because imagine living inside a family where every inheritance decision is analyzed by newspapers, commentators, historians, and millions of viewers online. Even a simple property transfer can suddenly become a national discussion. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. Another reason this story has caught so much attention is the timing. The monarchy is currently navigating a period of transition. Queen Elizabeth's era defined stability for more than 70 years. Her reign was so long that many people around the world struggled to imagine the monarchy without her steady presence. Now that the institution is adjusting to a new chapter under King Charles, every development inside the royal family tends to attract extra scrutiny. People are looking for signs of how the future will unfold, who will carry influence, who will shape the monarchy's direction, and how the next generation will manage the enormous expectations placed on them. Prince William sits right at the center of that conversation. Unlike previous heirs to the throne who often waited decades before stepping into the spotlight, William has already taken on a visible leadership role within the royal family. His public projects focus on issues like mental health, environmental protection, and homelessness. He represents a slightly more modern image of monarchy while still respecting traditional royal boundaries. So when news emerges that he has become the owner of one of the Queen's private estates, many people interpret it not just as an inheritance, but as another step in the gradual transfer of legacy from one generation to the next. It's almost symbolic, a quiet passing of the torch. But symbolism can also create tension, because every symbol carries meaning, and every meaning invites interpretation. Some royal commentators believe the situation will ultimately settle down without much long-term controversy. In their view, inheritance within the royal family has always followed patterns that prioritize the direct line of succession. From that perspective, William receiving the estate simply reflects the natural order of royal continuity. Others, however, believe that the emotional reaction inside extended family circles might be more complex than the palace publicly acknowledges. Royal families rarely discuss internal disagreements in public. Tradition encourages silence. The famous phrase often associated with the monarchy is simple but powerful: never complain, never explain. That philosophy has helped the royal institution survive many storms over the decades, but it also means that the public rarely hears the full story behind moments like this. Instead, people piece together fragments, a headline here, a quote there, an anonymous source suggesting tension. And suddenly a narrative begins to take shape. Sometimes that narrative turns out to be accurate. Other times it becomes exaggerated through repetition. Right now we are somewhere in the middle of that process. A story that may contain both truth and speculation, slowly evolving as more details emerge. And perhaps the most fascinating part of this entire situation is how it reflects the delicate balance the monarchy must constantly maintain. The royal family has to appear unified, stable, and above internal disputes. But at the same time, they are still human beings living inside a family structure filled with emotions, expectations, and personal relationships. Those two realities don't always align perfectly. Sometimes the public image looks calm while private conversations are far more complicated. Sometimes rumors exaggerate tensions that don't truly exist. And sometimes, small decisions carry far greater symbolic meaning than anyone expected. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. At first, they were quiet. A few comments in royal watching circles, a handful of headlines hinting at tension behind palace doors. But soon, the conversation grew louder. Because when it was revealed that Prince William would become the owner of one of Queen Elizabeth II's most private estates, people immediately began asking a very uncomfortable question. Why William, and not someone else? And that's where things start to get interesting. You see, royal estates are not just pieces of land. They are symbols. They represent history, loyalty, family ties, and sometimes even the Queen's final wishes. So when ownership of such a private estate moves from one generation to another, it rarely goes unnoticed. But this time, the reaction wasn't just curiosity. It was something closer to shock. Because according to reports circulating among royal commentators, the decision has apparently left members of Camilla's family less than thrilled. Now, before we go any further, it's important to understand how royal property actually works. Not everything owned by the royal family belongs to the state. Many people assume castles, land, and estates are simply passed around by the government or automatically inherited by the monarch. But that's not always the case. Some properties are privately owned, meaning the monarch can decide exactly who receives them, and Queen Elizabeth II was known for thinking very carefully about those decisions. For decades, she quietly managed a complicated balance inside the royal family. She had to consider tradition, duty, personal relationships, and the long-term future of the monarchy. Every decision she made carried weight, sometimes far beyond what the public could see. So when news emerged that Prince William had become the new owner of one of her private estates, royal watchers immediately started connecting the dots. Why William? Why now? And why does it seem to have stirred frustration among people connected to Queen Camilla? Some royal insiders suggest the answer might be simpler than it first appears. Prince William, after all, is the future king. He represents the next era of the monarchy. Many believe Queen Elizabeth always saw him as the long-term guardian of certain royal traditions. And if that's true, then giving him control of a private estate could be her way of strengthening his future role. But of course, family dynamics inside the royal circle are rarely that simple. Camilla's family, while now closely connected to the monarchy through her marriage to King Charles, did not grow up within the royal institution itself. Their relationship with royal assets has always been more distant compared to the direct Windsor bloodline. And that difference matters more than people might think. Because when property tied to Queen Elizabeth passes directly to Prince William, it reinforces the message that the core of royal power still flows through the traditional line of succession, King Charles, then Prince William, and eventually Prince George. For some observers, that feels like a clear signal about where the monarchy's future is headed. Now, does that mean there's open conflict inside the family? Probably not. The royal household is famously careful about keeping disagreements private. Public smiles often hide complicated conversations happening behind the scenes. But that hasn't stopped speculation. Some commentators believe Camilla's relatives might have hoped for a different outcome when it came to certain royal properties. Not necessarily ownership, but perhaps greater influence or involvement. Instead, the estate moving directly into Prince William's hands sends a very different message. It highlights the royal family's long-standing principle that the institution comes before personal relationships. And that principle has guided royal decisions for centuries. Think about it. Throughout British royal history, property transfers have often been used to strengthen the future monarch. Land, estates, and historic residences are carefully positioned so that each generation of heirs has the resources and status needed to support the crown. Queen Elizabeth understood that better than anyone. She spent 70 years watching how public perception could shape the monarchy's survival. She knew that stability mattered, continuity mattered, and above all, the line of succession had to remain clear and strong. So if she believed Prince William should inherit this estate, there's a good chance she saw it as part of a much larger plan. But of course that doesn't stop people from asking whether emotions might still be involved. Because royal families are still families. And families sometimes have expectations. Imagine being connected to the monarchy through marriage and watching major decisions unfold about property tied to the Queen herself. Even if you understand the tradition behind it, it's easy to see how feelings could become complicated, especially when the public begins framing the story as winners and losers. And that's exactly what has happened in this case. Headlines quickly suggested that Prince William's new ownership left Camilla's family frustrated. Whether those reports fully capture the reality is another question entirely. Royal coverage often relies on unnamed sources and speculation. Still, the narrative caught attention for a reason. People are fascinated by the internal balance of power within the royal family. They want to know who holds influence, who shapes decisions, and what those decisions reveal about the monarchy's future. And right now, all signs seem to point toward Prince William playing an increasingly central role. Over the past few years, we've watched his responsibilities grow steadily. From representing the crown at major international events to launching environmental initiatives and expanding royal charities, he's clearly being positioned as a leader for the next generation. Taking ownership of a private estate only adds another layer to that transition. It gives him not just symbolic authority but practical control over a piece of royal history. And that matters more than it might seem, because royal estates often become the backdrop for future events, charitable work, and even diplomatic gatherings. They help shape the public image of the monarchy. If Prince William manages this estate in a way that reflects modern priorities, environmental conservation, public engagement, transparency, it could strengthen his reputation as a forward-thinking royal. That possibility might be exactly what Queen Elizabeth had in mind. But again, none of this exists in a vacuum. Every royal decision creates ripples across the wider family network. King Charles himself has spent years navigating the delicate balance between personal relationships and institutional duty. His marriage to Camilla was once one of the most controversial chapters in modern royal history, yet over time the public gradually accepted her role. Today she serves as Queen Consort, supporting Charles in official duties. However, that doesn't automatically place her extended family at the center of royal inheritance structures. Those structures are designed around the crown itself, and the crown follows a very specific path. Which brings us back to Prince William. If there's one thing that's become clear in recent years, it's that William is preparing for an enormous responsibility. Becoming king isn't just about wearing a crown. It's about managing a centuries-old institution while also adapting it for the modern world. Every decision he makes now contributes to that preparation. Owning and overseeing a historic estate could give him the opportunity to practice exactly that kind of leadership, balancing tradition with innovation, protecting history while opening doors to the future. And perhaps most importantly, demonstrating that the monarchy remains stable despite the dramatic headlines that often surround it. Because let's be honest, the royal family has faced no shortage of turbulence lately. Between public controversies, media scrutiny, and shifting public attitudes toward monarchy itself, the pressure has never been higher. In that environment, decisions about property and inheritance carry even greater symbolic weight. They signal continuity. They show that the institution still has a clear structure, and they remind the public that the monarchy is planning for generations ahead. So when Prince William becomes the owner of a private estate connected to Queen Elizabeth, it's not just a personal milestone. It's part of a much larger story about the monarchy's future. A future that will eventually place William on the throne. And perhaps that's why the story has captured so much attention. People sense that something important is happening beneath the surface. Not necessarily conflict or drama, but a shift in generational power. The quiet transition from the era of Queen Elizabeth to the era of King Charles, and eventually to the era of King William. And transitions like that rarely happen overnight. They unfold slowly, through decisions that might seem small at first glance but reveal deeper strategy. Over time, whether Camilla's family truly feels frustrated or whether that narrative has simply been exaggerated by media speculation remains uncertain. But one thing is clear. Prince William's role inside the royal structure continues to grow. And every step he takes now is shaping the monarchy that the world will see in the decades ahead. But here's the question that keeps coming up among royal watchers. Was this estate transfer purely about tradition and succession? Or was it Queen Elizabeth's final way of signaling exactly who she trusted to protect her legacy? Because, if that's the case, the message could not be clearer. The future of the royal family rests firmly in Prince William's hands. And when you step back and look at the bigger picture, this whole story becomes even more fascinating. Because royal inheritance has never been just about land or money. It's always been about legacy. Queen Elizabeth II spent more than 70 years protecting that legacy. Every decision she made, especially in her later years, was carefully measured. She understood that the monarchy had entered a new and unpredictable era. Public opinion changes quickly. Media narratives move faster than ever. And every move the royal family makes is examined under a global spotlight. So when an estate connected to her private life ends up in the hands of Prince William, many people see it as more than a simple transfer of property. They see it as a quiet signal, a message about the future direction of the royal family. Because let's be honest, William represents something very different. He represents the next generation of monarchy, a generation that grew up in the age of the internet, social media, and non-stop global attention, a generation that understands how important public perception has become, and perhaps most importantly, a generation that knows the royal family cannot survive on tradition alone. It has to evolve. That's why every step Prince William takes right now matters. Every responsibility he accepts, every decision he makes, and even every property he inherits, all of it builds the foundation for the day he eventually becomes king. Now, whether Camilla's family truly feels upset about this situation, or whether that part of the story has been exaggerated by royal gossip, we may never fully know. The royal household is famous for keeping sensitive matters private. Disagreements rarely become public, and if they do, they are usually wrapped in polite silence. But speculation will always exist. Because the royal family is not just a family, it's an institution watched by millions around the world, and people are always trying to read between the lines. What does this decision really mean? Was it purely tradition? Was it strategy? Or could it have been Queen Elizabeth's final way of ensuring that the person she believed in most would carry forward her personal legacy? Those are the questions that keep royal watchers talking. And honestly, that's what makes stories like this so interesting. They remind us that behind the crowns, palaces, and ceremonies, there are still human relationships. There are expectations, emotions, and complicated family dynamics. But at the end of the day, one thing is certain. Prince William's role inside the monarchy is growing stronger with every passing year, and decisions like this only reinforce that reality. The era of Queen Elizabeth may have ended, but the foundation she built is still shaping the royal family today. And now it looks like Prince William is being trusted to carry that foundation into the future. The real question is, how will he use it? Will he protect royal tradition exactly as it has always been? Or will he reshape the monarchy for a completely new generation? That answer will reveal itself slowly over the coming years. But I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Prince William inheriting this estate was simply part of royal tradition? Or do you believe there's more happening behind the scenes than the public is being told? Drop your opinion down in the comments below because I read as many of them as I can, and your perspective always adds something new to the conversation. And if you enjoy deep royal analysis and stories that go beyond the headlines, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who follows royal news as closely as you do. Also, before you leave, make sure you check out the next video on this channel where we talk about another royal twist that has people asking serious questions about the future of the monarchy. Trust me, once you hear that story, you might see the royal family in a completely different way.